They told us Vril was only a word, a myth, a metaphor, a spark from a dead novel. But I saw what it became, and how it devoured every soul who dared believe in it. That is how it began, and how it ended. But this is how it started. Berlin in 1929 was a dying carnival. The Weimar Republic stuttered like an old phonograph. The same broken tune, louder every day. Men shouted politics from beer hall stages, their voices cracking like old wood. Bread lines coiled down whole city blocks. And at night, the cabarets blazed with light and gin and painted smiles, as if mocking the hunger crouched outside their doors. I walked between both worlds, never belonging to either. By day, I worked as an assistant in a second-hand bookshop on Friedrichstrasse, sorting brittle pamphlets about phrenology and Atlantis for old men who trembled as they spoke. By night, I prowled the underground lecture halls and smoky cafes where mystics whispered of hidden currents and world forces, and where the desperate spoke of destiny like it was an antidote to hunger. I was 23, and I wanted, no, needed, to believe there was something more, something older than this gray, gasping century. That was the night I found the envelope. It had no name, just a black sun stamped in wax across the flap. Inside, a card of heavy cream stock. 3 words, handwritten in sharp Gothic script. Erkenne das Vril. Know the Vril. And below it, an address. Kaiserstrasse 88, midnight. No sender. No invitation line. No explanation. I stood in the rain outside the shop, the city roaring around me, the card warm between my fingers, as though it had its own pulse. At 1:45, I stood at Kaiserstrasse 88, staring at an abandoned theater whose windows were as black as blind eyes. The marquee letters were long gone. The front door sagged like rotten teeth, but warm light flickered between the slats of the boarded windows, and from within came the faint drone of chanting. I should have walked away, but my feet moved forward without asking me. Inside, the air was thick with candle smoke and myrrh. A dozen people sat in a circle on the ruined stage, all dressed in black coats despite the heat. Men and women, pale, intent, unblinking. In the center, a single crystal bowl of water. Its surface rippled though no one touched it. At the far end of the circle stood her, tall, cloaked in black velvet, hair as pale as candle wax, eyes the color of winter sky, and glowing faintly, like coals buried under ice. She spoke, and though her lips barely moved, her voice filled the theater like smoke. Vril, she said, is the light beneath the world, the force older than fire, the root from which all Arya once grew. The circle hummed in response, low and resonant, as though the word had struck something deep beneath their ribs. My heart thundered. I could not look away. They asked for silence. They asked for blood. Each member drew a single drop from their fingertip into the bowl. When they passed it to me, my hand trembled, but I did it. The moment the blood touched water, the surface flared silver, and every candle guttered inward. And then I saw a corridor of black stone curving downward forever, lined with mirrors that reflected nothing, and at the bottom, a blazing wheel of light turning in absolute darkness. I gasped and stumbled. The vision vanished. The room was still, the water still rippling, the cloaked woman smiling faintly like she already knew. "Welcome," she whispered. "You are chosen." When I staggered into the cold Berlin air at dawn, the city looked hollow, like a painted set. I clutched the card in my pocket until the wax seal crumbled. Part of me wanted to run, but the deeper part, the part that had stared too long into old books and found nothing, was burning. If you followed me this far, then you must understand how people are pulled into such things, how hope becomes hunger and hunger becomes faith. And if you want to walk further into this darkness with me, remember to like this story and subscribe so you don't lose the path. The next meeting was in 3 nights, and I would be there, ready to know the Vril. I told myself I wouldn't go back. For 3 days, I repeated it like a prayer. You imagined it. It was smoke, suggestion, hypnosis. But the vision wouldn't leave me. That impossible corridor spiraling downward, the mirrors that reflected nothing, the blazing wheel turning in silence. It haunted the edges of my sleep, like a sound I could almost hear. So on the 3rd night, when the clock struck 11, I was already on Kaiserstrasse. The theater doors were unlocked this time. Inside, everything had changed. Gone was the ruinous stage and dust-choked chairs. In their place, black velvet curtains drawn tight, rugs of crimson and gold, and a single iron brazier glowing with blue flame at the center of the stage. A dozen figures stood in a perfect circle. Men in black tailcoats with high collars, women in long dark gowns, their hair braided with silver cords. Their eyes caught the brazier's light like glass, and at their head stood the pale woman from before. "Welcome back," she said softly, "as we knew you would." They called themselves the Vril Gesellschaft. They did not speak their birth names inside this room. Each bore a rune name instead, carved on small bone medallions hung around their throats. They told me that Vril was not just energy, not just spirit, but the primal force behind all matter, the breath of the hidden sun within the earth. To wield it, they said, one must clear the mind of all illusion. They spoke of shedding identity as a snake sheds skin. One man, broad-shouldered with eyes like winter slate, knelt and let them burn his passport to ash. The others applauded softly. I was given a robe of black silk and told to stand inside their circle. They handed me a small silver knife and a strip of linen. "Cut away your name," the pale woman said. I drew the blade across my fingertip. Blood welled, warm and dark. I pressed it to the linen and wrapped it around my wrist like a brand. "Your name is nothing now," she whispered. "Now you will find your true name." They blindfolded me. The air filled with the drone of their chant, low and resonant, like wind inside stone. What followed was not quite ceremony and not quite dream. They spun me slowly, their hands cold on my shoulders. Their voices merged into one unbroken tone that rose until the room seemed to vibrate. Beneath my feet, the floor felt soft, then hollow, as if I were standing on air. And then, weightlessness. I felt myself falling inward through endless space, through layers of light and shadow, until I stood in a void of molten gold. A colossal figure loomed there, neither man nor woman, neither beast nor god, its eyes like burning suns, its skin a lattice of radiant veins, and it spoke a single word that I could not remember the instant it ended. I woke on the theater floor, gasping. My robe was soaked in sweat. The others knelt around me, eyes glittering with approval. "Chosen," the pale woman said. Her lips barely moved. "You have touched the Vril." Afterward, we drank bitter black wine from a shared chalice and sat cross-legged on the carpet while they spoke of their work. They were scholars, engineers, linguists, artists, at least by day. But here, They pursued what they called the Aldebaran doctrine, that the ancient Arya came not from Earth, but from beyond the stars, and that they had left fragments of their power buried deep within human blood. They believed Vril could awaken it, that it would raise a new order from the ashes of the old. No one laughed. No one even smiled. They spoke of it with the solemnity of surgeons describing the beating of a heart. I left at dawn. The streets were silvered with frost, and Berlin lay silent as a corpse. I walked until my feet ached, trying to convince myself it had been nothing but theater. Actors and smoke, clever lights, drugs in the wine. And yet, I could still feel that golden light beneath my skin, faint and pulsing, like a second heart. In the days that followed, I found myself sketching symbols on the backs of receipts, in the corners of bookshop ledgers, curved sunwheels, wolf-headed figures, the strange spiral of lines I had seen running through the golden giant's body. They told me I was to return next week to begin the deep work. I told them yes before I'd even thought about it. If you are still listening to this, if you have walked with me this far, then you must understand how easy it is to fall. Next, they would give me a new name, and I would no longer be the man who walked in off the street. I would be theirs. Berlin wore its hunger like a crown. Even as the cafes glittered and the theaters hummed, there was a hollowness in the air, a strange weight, as if the entire city were holding its breath, waiting for something unseen to rise. Inside the Vril Society, that something was no longer whispered about. It was shouted, sung, carved into stone, inked into skin. They no longer met in the crumbling theater. The pale woman, whom we now called Sigrun, led us instead to a new sanctum, a candlelit ballroom inside an abandoned townhouse on Leipziger Straße. Its windows were bricked over. The grand mirrors were shrouded in black velvet. The parquet floor was painted with a great spiral sunwheel, gold lines gleaming under the torchlight. And at the center stood an empty throne of black oak carved with runes. Soon, Sigrun said, tracing her pale fingers along its arms, it will have a rightful occupant. The language of the circle had changed. No longer soft metaphors about inner light and hidden forces. Now they spoke in iron tones of destiny, of how Germany was not fallen, but asleep, and that Vril would awaken her. They called themselves Die Erwählten, the Chosen. They wore tailored black coats embroidered with silver runes and braided silver cords at their shoulders. Some had shaved their heads entirely. Every meeting began with the same chant. The blood remembers. The blood returns. The sound of it thudded in my chest like a drum. One night they brought out a brass projector and reeled ancient photographs across the blank wall. Ruined temples, runestones, skulls measured with calipers. These, Sigrun whispered, are fragments of our forebears, the Arya, children of Aldebaran, who seeded the world with our blood. Vril is their memory and their gift. She gestured, and a tall man named Woden rose. He rolled out blueprints, schematics of strange machines, great spinning discs encased in copper rings with coils like rib cages. They flew once, he said, eyes shining. Before the flood, they will fly again. A murmur of reverence passed through the circle. I watched, silent, the candle smoke curling in my lungs like incense. Part of me wanted to laugh. Part of me wanted to kneel. Because as they spoke, I felt a low hum in the floorboards, like a pulse. And for a flicker of a moment, I saw not the ballroom, not the ruinous townhouse, but a colossal silver city stretching to the horizon, every tower humming like a tuning fork, every street lit by swirling golden light. When I blinked, it was gone, but the feeling of it stayed lodged behind my eyes like a splinter. In the weeks that followed, their behavior changed. They began patrolling their own thoughts, speaking less, eyes distant, as if listening to voices only they could hear. Some stopped sleeping. Some stopped eating. I returned to the bookshop each morning with ink-stained hands, pretending to catalog tomes while drawing intricate sun spirals across the ledges. Customers would ask me questions, and I wouldn't hear them until the third time. The city itself began to warp around me. Tram wires buzzed like voices. Statues turned their heads when I passed. Reflections in the glass lagged a half-second behind me. I didn't tell anyone. I thought it meant the Vril was waking in me. The night it all crystallized, Sigrun summoned me alone. We sat opposite each other in the empty ballroom, the throne looming between us. The torches hissed like serpents in the stillness. "You are almost ready," she said softly. "The world is about to burn, and we will be the ones who rise from the ashes. But first, you must see the true shape of power." She handed me a silver bowl filled with black liquid that smelled like crushed flowers and copper. "Drink." It burned cold as it went down. Then the world split open. The floor vanished. I stood on a black plain beneath a bleeding red sky. And above me towered a colossal figure of glass and light, its bones made of lightning, its heart a spinning sun. It looked down at me with 1,000 mirrored eyes and opened its mouth to speak. But the sound was too vast. It struck through me like a hammer. I felt my thoughts shatter like glass. And then I was back on the ballroom floor, on my knees, gasping. Sigrun knelt close, her cold hands framing my face. "You saw it," she whispered. "You belong to it now." I walked home through empty Berlin streets, the lamps flickering like dying stars. Somewhere distant, church bells rang midnight. They sounded hollow, tinny, like toys. I remember thinking, we will burn this world clean and build something shining in its place. And that thought felt beautiful. Soon they would take me to meet the Thule elders, and the last light of reason in me would go out. It was in the summer of 1932 that the air inside the circle changed. It grew heavier, sharper, as if charged with static. The chants became shorter, the candles burned colder, and the whispers of stars and ancient empires gave way to new words, spoken in iron tones: blood, rebirth, destiny, Reich. Sigrun said we were ready to ascend to the Thule chamber. The name alone made the others murmur with awe. I had heard it mentioned only in fragments before, spoken of like a vanished temple, half myth. Thule was where it had all begun, they said. Before Vril, before the circle, before the throne. Thule lit the spark, Sigrun told me, and we will be the flame. They brought us to a townhouse in Charlottenburg, past curving streets of ornate stone facades and shuttered shops. Inside, the windows were painted black. The halls hung with moth-eaten banners depicting Nordic wolves and spears. The air smelled of cedar and rust. We were led into a vaulted cellar lit by only 2 oil lamps. At the far end sat 3 old men in dark suits, their faces carved from shadow, white hair combed like powdered ash. They did not rise to greet us. One of them, tall, skeletal, with glacier-colored eyes, simply said, the children of Thule return. They spoke little, and when they did, their words were like chisels. They had been part of the original Thule Gesellschaft in Munich before the war, they said. They had seen the old empire collapse in flame and hunger, and now they watched the new one gestating, like an egg cracking from within. They spoke of a young political party gathering strength in beer halls and ballot boxes. They spoke of uniforms, order, purity, fire. Their words were dry and cold, but the circle listened like zealots at a sermon. I listened too, and felt the first faint coil of fear in my chest. Because this was not the language of hidden suns and silver cities anymore. This was the language of men, flesh, steel, power. The Thule elders spoke of the Vril as if it were not a mystery to awaken, but a weapon to wield, as though all our visions were merely tools, scaffolding for something harder, sharper, something that could kill. Afterward, we were escorted back to our ballroom. The others were electric with fervor, whispering about alignment and destiny fulfilled. They began arriving at meetings in storm gray uniforms, black armbands stitched with runes alongside new red insignia. Woden, once a quiet engineer with nervous hands, now carried himself like an officer. He had begun drilling them in silent formations before rituals, boots slamming in unison against the parquet. Each stomp sent dust trembling from the velvet-shrouded mirrors. Sigrun watched it all from the throne, her pale eyes glowing faintly like distant stars. She said nothing. She didn't need to. They were hers. I tried to speak with her alone, one night after the others had gone. "Is this what we are?" I asked. "Marches and banners and politics." Her gaze slid over me like glass. "Politics," she said, "is the language the blind understand. We speak in symbols. They will follow our shadow, thinking it their own idea." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe this was all theater, a mask, that the fire she stoked in their chests was still only metaphor. But in their eyes I saw hunger, and hunger does not stay metaphorical for long. Soon they began recruiting from outside. Men from nationalist youth leagues, tall and blonde and wide-eyed, brought in for observation. They stood at the back of the hall, trembling with fervor as we chanted, their fists clenched wide. When Sigrun spoke, they leaned forward like stalks of wheat bending toward the sun. I watched them take the blood oath. I watched them burn their old names. And for the first time, I felt the room tilt away from me, as though I was standing on the skin of a spinning sphere, and gravity had chosen someone else. I stopped eating. I stopped writing letters. I began walking Berlin streets until dawn, trying to remember what the city had looked like before I saw it through their eyes. It all seemed thinner now. The buildings like scenery flats, the people like mannequins drifting through pre-written lines. Only the circle felt solid, like black stone under my feet. And I feared that if I left it, I would fall straight through the hollow world. They said the next step was the blood rites, that we were to descend beneath the city, where the hidden sun waited. And though my mouth went dry and my stomach knotted, I nodded. Because by then, I wasn't sure there was anything left of me to save. The Reich rose like a thunderhead. Banners bloomed from stone facades overnight like red wounds. Radio towers screamed speeches into the air until even silence seemed to echo with applause. And inside our hidden hall on Leipziger Straße, the circle changed forever. They no longer called themselves a circle. They called themselves Die Flamme, the flame. The velvet curtains came down. The shrouds were stripped from the mirrors. The black ballroom became a shrine. The sun wheel was repainted in blood-red enamel across the entire parquet floor. Its arms flared out like spokes of a great machine, and in its center, beneath the throne, they set a stone altar carved with runes and wolf-headed gargoyles, its corners blackened from old fire. The air smelled of iron and wax and something sweetly rotting. They spoke now not of awakening the Vril, but of forging it. They said the world had chosen them, that the rise of the Reich was a sign, the final omen that their time had come. The Thule elders returned, now in crisp black uniforms, marked with twin lightning runes. They nodded at our work like stonemasons inspecting a foundation, and when Sigrun descended a stair to the throne, they bowed. The first blood rite was Wodan's idea. He claimed the veil between this world and the hidden sun was thinnest when flesh remembered its origin. He had read this, he said, in the whispered fragments of the Aldebaran doctrine. They brought a lamb to the hall. Its eyes were wide and black as ink. They painted runes across its white flanks in crimson ochre and laid it on the altar. The chant began low and soft, a pulse beneath the skin of the world. Woden's knife rose and fell, its blood soaked into the carved stone like dry earth drinking rain. The candles flared blue, and for a moment I thought I saw the sun wheel under our feet rotate. Slowly, soundlessly, as if waking. After that night, something snapped. They held rites twice a week. Blood on the altar, blood on their foreheads, blood dripping across their silver medallions as they knelt, eyes blazing. They carved runes into their own arms with silver knives, claiming the pain anchored them to the current of the Vril. Woden bled until he fainted on the floor. They carried him out like a martyr, his lips murmuring half-finished runes as if in sleep. I tried to leave once. I slipped out after the ceremony, my robe damp with sweat, and walked the length of Unter den Linden, breathing the sharp night air like a drowning man. But even there, even outside, the city felt infected. Swastikas hung from every balcony. Bands of brown shirts laughed under street lamps, their boots echoing like gunfire. Their eyes were the same as the circles now, bright and empty. And I realized there was nowhere to run. The whole world was tilting their way. So I went back. The rites grew stranger. They would place their bloodied hands on the altar and speak in dead tongues, voices overlapping like a swarm of bees, until the mirrors shuddered and cracked in their frames. Sometimes the cracks healed by morning. Sometimes they didn't. Sigrun no longer walked among us. She sat enthroned, still and perfect, watching through half-lidded eyes, as if she were listening to something behind the walls. She spoke only to me. "You must go deeper," she whispered one night, her cold breath brushing my ear. "Deeper than blood, deeper than death. Only then will the light open to you." I stopped sleeping. The visions came even while awake now, glowing wheels turning inside my chest, whispered runes in the hum of the streetcars, shadows behind me that didn't follow when I turned. I opened an old anatomy textbook in the shop one morning and found my own handwriting filling its margins, spirals of runes, diagrams of bones etched with sun wheels, and words I did not remember writing. Cut away the flesh. The light remains. By spring of 1934, the rites had bled out of the ballroom and into the city. They met in catacombs beneath the Anhalter Bahnhof, in old plague tunnels lined with limestone skulls. They burned their names into the stone with candle flames and swore oaths to the black sun that no living force could break. I watched them all fall to their knees as Sigrun raised her hands, and I saw what they could not, the fine cracks forming in their minds like ice underfoot. And still, I knelt too, because by then I no longer trusted what part of me was real and what part belonged to the Vril. It began with the hum. Faint at first, like the tremble of distant thunder, then sharper, rising through the floorboards of the ballroom, as if the building itself had begun to breathe. Woden said it was the current, that the blood rites had thinned the veil, and that the Vril was gathering, circling like a coiled serpent, waiting to be given form. So they set out to build a vessel for it. The ballroom was abandoned now. We met instead in the cellars beneath an old tram depot at the edge of Berlin, a forgotten underworld of rusted tracks and soot-choked arches. There, they cleared a wide stone chamber and ringed it with copper rods driven into the walls like spears. Coils of wire sprawled across the floor like tangled veins. Tables sagged under the weight of brass flywheels, mercury flasks, and blueprints inked in runes as much as numbers. The air stank of solder and ozone. Every sound seemed muffled, as if we were underwater. They called it the Rad des Lichts, the Wheel of Light. It began as a spinning brass disc, but Woden insisted brass could not contain the current. He ordered a new frame forged of tungsten and black iron, its rim carved with a spiral, sunwheel and etched with runes in flowing script. They mounted it on a steel spindle anchored in a basalt plinth cut from the Black Forest. To ground the current in ancient stone, when it turned, it screamed. Sparks leapt from its rim like white insects. Our robes crackled with static, and our teeth ached from the vibration. Woden stood closest, eyes bloodshot, grinning through clenched teeth, as if the sound were feeding him. Sigrun never touched the machine. She only watched, silent, her pale eyes reflecting the arcs of light, like distant lightning. "The flesh is weak," she said when I asked her. "The wheel will make it strong." The experiments grew more reckless. They filled the wheel's hollow rim with liquid mercury, claiming the ancient Arya had used it to fly between the stars. They wrapped copper coils around it and fed it power from sputtering diesel generators hauled down into the cellar on greased rails. The noise was unbearable. A high, shivering scream that pierced bone. My vision blurred when I stood near it, and the air thickened as if time itself were slowing. One night the wheel spun so fast it blurred into a ring of solid white fire. Every lamp in the cellar burst at once. Darkness slammed in like a wall. When the light returned, 2 of the younger acolytes were on the floor, bleeding from their noses, their eyes rolled back, their silver medallions scorched black against their throats. Woden called it proof. Sigrun called it awakening. I called it something I could not name. After that, they began feeding blood into the machine. A thin, silver trough ran from the altar to the wheel's base. Each of us made shallow cuts in our forearms and let it run, the smell of iron filling the air as the wheel screamed, and the copper coils glowed dull red. They said it sharpened the resonance. They said they could feel the ancestors stirring. I felt only a deep sickness in my gut, and yet I pressed my bleeding wrist to the trough like the rest, because if it worked, If they truly opened a door, I wanted to see what lay beyond it, even if it burned me hollow. The night it nearly killed us all, the chamber had gone still and cold as a crypt. The wheel turned slower than usual, its arcs of light twitching like dying nerves. Woden poured a vial of mercury onto its spinning rim, murmuring runes under his breath. The wheel screamed once, then went silent. The air tore open. A blast of white light burst from the wheel, flattening us to the floor, as if a giant hand had struck. Heat seared my skin. Glass shattered. The basalt plinth cracked down the center with a sound like a splitting skull. When I could see again, the chamber was black with smoke. Woden was on his knees, laughing hoarsely, his eyebrows scorched away, his fingertips blistered raw and smoking. The two youngest lay unmoving against the far wall, their robes smoldering. One did not breathe. No one spoke. No one moved. Sigrun only smiled. "Now," she whispered, "the veil is thinning." We buried the boy in the forest that night under a ring of stones. The others said he had been chosen to open the path. They cut a lock of his hair to place on the altar. I said nothing. The wheel still screamed faintly in my skull, even though it lay in pieces behind me. I began dreaming of corridors again. Black stone, endless mirrors, the blazing wheel of light turning in absolute darkness. And this time, something was standing beside it, watching me with my own face. The wheel was gone, dismantled after the boy's death. Its blackened pieces lay locked in steel crates beneath our old ballroom, silent as corpses. But the others whispered that it had worked, that the flash of white light had not been fire, but a glimpse, a crack in the veil. Woden muttered constantly about resonance. The others stopped cutting themselves and began fasting, their eyes hollow and glowing like distant lamps. Sigrun said nothing. She only said, "We will go to where the first fire sleeps." They led us out of Berlin at dusk, 10 of us in 2 black cars, rumbling west along narrow roads beneath the ragged spires of the Black Forest. The city fell away behind us like a shed skin. The trees closed in, tall, skeletal, dripping with cold mist. For hours the only sound was the hum of the engines and the wet hiss of tires on stone. At last the road ended at a moss-choked clearing. There stood a ruined tower, half swallowed by earth, its stones slick with centuries of rain. The entrance yawned like a throat. Woden said it had once been a monastery. Sigrun said it had been here long before monks ever walked the earth. Inside, the air was glacial. Our torches hissed in the damp. We descended a spiral stair for what felt like hours, our footsteps echoing through hollow stone. The walls were carved with eroded glyphs, serpents swallowing their tails, sunwheels coiled inside the labyrinths. At the stair's end lay a vast circular chamber. The floor was inlaid with black basalt, a perfect 12-arm black sun spanning wall to wall. It gleamed like wet oil under the torchlight. At its center rose a stone plinth, carved with spiraling runes that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking. The air vibrated faintly, like a distant insect trapped in my skull. We formed a circle around the black sun. Sigrun stepped into its center and removed her cloak. Her skin was almost luminescent in the torchlight, marked with spirals of white chalk and streaks of dried blood across her chest and wrists. Her hair was braided with silver wire and bone beads. She raised her hands. The others knelt. I did too. Though my knees shook, the rite began as a whisper, a low susurrus of runes rolling from their tongues, slow and measured, building like the beat of an unseen drum. Woden slit his forearm with a silver knife and let his blood fall onto the basalt, where it ran along the etched grooves like rivers seeking the sea. One by one, they followed. The blood traced the 12 arms of the sun wheel, pulsing faintly as it spread. The hum grew louder. The air thickened until breathing felt like swallowing ash. The torches bent inward, their flames streaming toward the center. Sigrun's eyes rolled back. Her voice rose like iron tearing. "Children of Aldebaran, your blood has returned. Open the gate." The black sun began to glow, faint at first, dull red veins beneath stone, then brighter, searing, until the whole chamber was bathed in molten light. The blood boiled. Steam hissed from the cracks. The runes on the plinth writhed like living worms. And then it opened. I saw the stone fall away, and below it, an endless abyss of golden fire, a hollow world spinning inside the earth. Mountains of black crystal glowing with internal suns. Rivers of molten light swirling around a colossal wheel of flame, turning in perfect silence. Shapes rose from the abyss. Not men, not beasts, not gods. Titanic forms of glass and light, their eyes like eclipsed suns, their skin latticed with radiant veins. They opened their mouths. The sound was a pressure more than a noise, like the ocean crushing a diver's chest. I felt my mind splinter. Something slipped through the cracks. When I came back, I was lying on the cold stone floor, my robe soaked with sweat, my lips raw from biting through them. The chamber was dark and silent. The torches guttered low. The blood had vanished from the black sun as if the stone had drunk it dry. The others lay sprawled where they had fallen, trembling, murmuring fragments of dead tongues. Sigrun stood over me, her pale face unreadable, her eyes two perfect coins of white fire. She whispered, "Now you have seen it. Now you cannot leave." We climbed back into the night like revenants. The trees were black bones against a gray sky. Not one of us spoke on the drive back to Berlin. But in the hum of the tires on stone, I thought I heard the wheel turning. Slowly, patiently, far below the world, the Reich had grown teeth. Where once it smiled with banners and brass fanfares, now it glinted with knives. And the knives were turning inward. It began as whispers. A Thule elder simply did not appear 1 week. His seat sat empty and cold through the entire ceremony. A thin circle of dust where his medallion had once lain on the altar. The next day we found out he had been taken by the Gestapo. No charges announced, no trial, just gone. 2 days later another vanished, then another. Soon the whispers hardened into fear. We heard of orders from Himmler himself. Secret societies to be dissolved or absorbed into the Reich main security office. All lodge groups, esoteric orders and mystical salons were declared degenerate subversives. They were accused of diluting the German will with Oriental poisons. The irony might have been laughable if it hadn't tasted like blood. The Vril circle splintered. Half of them fled immediately, burning their robes, shearing their hair, trying to melt back into the machinery of the new Reich. The rest stayed, not out of loyalty, but out of hunger. They had seen the abyss. They could not return to the world of dust and wages and clocks. I stayed because I had nowhere else to go. We abandoned the ballroom. The windows were smashed, the parquet floor stripped bare. Someone had scrawled, "Verräter," traitors across the front door in red paint that never seemed to dry. We scattered into safe houses across Berlin, meeting in twos or threes in candle-lit attics, always at different addresses, always checking shadows before we spoke. The rituals grew quieter, faster, furtive. The words were hurried, the cuts shallow. Even Sigrun moved like a hunted animal now, her pale eyes darting to the windows at every sound. One night I arrived at the cellar beneath the tram depot and found it gutted. The wheel was gone. The plinth was gone. Even the copper rods had been ripped from the walls, leaving pale scars in the stone. Only black scorch marks remained on the floor, and the smell of iron and fear. We were not alone in the shadows. Men in plain suits had begun to follow us. They lingered at street corners near our shops, watched from parked cars as we walked home, their hats pulled low, their eyes blank. Some nights I woke to faint clicks on the phone line, or to the sensation of being watched from just beyond the window glass. The air of Berlin had changed. It was no longer heavy. It was sharp, like a trap about to spring. The final blow came quietly. One of our youngest, Otto, barely 20, vanished after a meeting. The next week his voice returned on the radio, reading a prepared confession. He spoke of blasphemous rites, blood sacrifices, plans to overthrow the Reich from within. Every word a lie, every word perfectly recited. His voice did not tremble, but I knew that he was trembling when he said them. We never saw him again. The purge swept wider. They seized the Thule townhouse in Charlottenburg. They torched the old archives in Munich. The Gestapo came for anyone even rumored to have attended a séance. We watched whole worlds vanish overnight, burned to ash under floodlights while soldiers laughed. The past itself was being erased, scrubbed clean to make room for their new myth. We retreated to a final safe house on the city's edge, a sagging, half-timbered house beside the Havel, its shutters warped, its rooms echoing and bare. We boarded the windows. We spoke only in whispers. There were 7 of us now. Sigrun, Wodan, and 5 hollow-eyed remnants clinging to what was left of the dream. Even in silence, the house seemed to hum faintly, like the dying heartbeat of something vast and buried. One night, Sigrun gathered us around a single candle. Her voice was quieter than I had ever heard it. They have stolen our names. They will burn our symbols. They will silence our voices. So, we will become shadows. She placed a small iron box on the table. Inside lay our journals, our medallions, our runic maps, all bound in black silk cord. She struck a match and dropped it in. The silk caught instantly. Flames crawled over the books, blackening the runes until they curled like dead leaves. The candlelight glimmered in her eyes like distant stars. "When the world forgets us," she whispered, "the Vril will remember." The smoke curled around us in the dark. We said nothing. We watched the last of our history turn to ash. And in the silence, I thought I heard something laugh far below the world. Berlin was not a city anymore. It was a carcass picked clean by crows and fire. The air reeked of charred stone and human dust. Buildings stood like broken teeth against a black sky, their windows glowing with the orange breath of distant firestorms. Shells moaned overhead like dying whales. The ground shook in long, slow waves, as if some vast creature were crawling beneath the earth. And through it all, I walked with a single name on my tongue. Sigrun. I had not seen her in 8 years. After the purge, she had vanished, as though she had never existed. The others had scattered or been swallowed. Wodan rumored dead on the Eastern Front, 3 taken by the Gestapo, once seen boarding a train for Argentina with a false name. I had buried the last of my journals in a tin box beneath a birch tree and tried to live as a ghost in Prague. But when the Reich began to crumble, when the Red Army closed its jaws around Berlin, I felt the pull like a hook in my chest. The wheel was still turning somewhere beneath the rubble. I could feel it. I found her in a bombed cellar beneath Friedrichstrasse, down a stairwell half collapsed with bricks and bone dust. The room smelled of mildew, gun oil, and something older. That same dry sweetness I had smelled the night of the first blood rite. There were 4 others with her, all thin as matchsticks, eyes like lantern coals set in skulls. Their hair was patchy, their fingernails cracked, but their medallions still hung around their necks. The runes were worn smooth, like stones washed by centuries of tide. They had drawn a new sun wheel on the cracked cement floor, in black soot and blood. It was crooked, broken in 2 places, but they knelt around it like saints at an altar. Sigrun stood in the center. Her cloak was ragged and mud-stained, but she still stood like a queen carved from ice. Her pale eyes caught the flicker of a single candle. They glowed faintly, impossibly, as if the fires outside were reflected in her bones. "We will open the gate," she said. Her voice was the same as it had always been. Soft, patient, inevitable. The world is ending. We will not end with it. The blood remembers. The blood returns. The ritual began. They cut themselves without hesitation, blood hissing on the cold stone. They chanted through cracked lips, their voices thin and ragged as rusted bells. I watched their shadows twitch across the walls, insect-thin, elongating, twisting like black threads pulled by invisible hands. The room pulsed with the sound. Even the distant artillery faded. It was like being back beneath the black forest, hearing the heartbeat of something vast and buried. Sigrun raised her arms. Her robe slipped from her shoulders, revealing skin scored with old scars and fresh wounds painted into spirals. Her ribs stood out like the hull of a wrecked ship. She spoke the old words. Not chants now, but a language, complete and alive, pouring from her like molten iron. The blood on the floor began to boil. The lines of the broken sunwheel glowed red. The air shuddered, and then I saw the abyss again. The stone fell away. There was no city, no cellar, no war. Only the hollow earth yawning below, rivers of molten ghosts swirling around the colossal blazing wheel, and the glass giants rising from it, their mirrored eyes swallowing me whole. They opened their mouths, and I felt my thoughts peel away like bark. I felt my name tear loose from my body like a thread. I saw myself reflected in their eyes, but vast, luminous, inhuman. And then I heard it. Laughter. Low, resonant, rolling up from the abyss like a tide of broken bells. It was not joyous. It was not cruel. It was older than both. Someone screamed. The vision shattered. I was back in the cellar. 2 of the others lay convulsing on the floor, foam on their lips. Their eyes rolled white. Another had set himself on fire, silent, swaying, as flames crawled up his robe. The sunwheel's glow snapped out. Darkness crashed down like stone. The candle guttered. Only smoke remained. Sigrun stood alone at the center of the ruin, her face hollow, her eyes black and empty as the sockets of a skull. "They would not take us," she whispered. Then she turned and walked into the shadows at the far end of the cellar. I never saw her again. I stumbled into the burning streets, ash crunching under my boots. the roar of artillery closing in from every side. Above the ruins, the sky flickered with blood-red light, as if something behind it was trying to burn through. My name is not mine anymore. The man who bore it lies buried somewhere under Berlin, perhaps crushed beneath a wall, perhaps nothing but soot swirling in the wind that sighs through its broken streets. I have lived 20 years as a bookseller in Bremen, a quiet man, with a grey mustache and a stoop from shelving atlases. The neighbors know me as courteous, harmless, ordinary. They do not know that sometimes I wake in the black hours before dawn, with the sound of a wheel screaming inside my skull, or that I keep the curtains drawn even on the brightest mornings, because I fear what I might see reflected in the glass. For years I kept what remained, the silver medallion with my rune name, scorched and blackened at the edges, a single torn page from my old journal, still faintly smelling of wax and blood, and buried deepest in the bottom drawer, a small obsidian shard from the black sun chamber, its surface slick and cold as ice even in summer. I told myself it was only to remind me what I had escaped, but in truth, it was to prove it had been real. Because sometimes, in the quiet between closing the shop and turning off the lamps, I wondered if it had all been a fever, a shared hallucination among the desperate and the mad. Then I would touch the stone and feel it hum faintly against my palm like the heartbeat of something sleeping. In the spring of 1963, I read that old theater on Kaiserstrasse had been renovated into a cinema. They had torn down the crumbling facade, scrubbed the walls white, hung bright banners over the doors. The article called it a rebirth. The word stung like smoke behind my eyes. I closed the shop for 3 days and took the train east. Berlin was unrecognizable. Broad, clean boulevards cut through what had once been rubble. Children laughed outside ice cream shops where I'd seen tanks burn. Glass towers rose where the bones of the Reich had smoldered. The city glittered like a mask. But if you stood very still, you could feel the hollow spaces beneath it, the layers of silence stacked like old ash. I walked the streets where we had once whispered of hidden suns. I passed the cafe that had been our ballroom. Its windows were bright with pastries and plastic flowers. No one inside looked up as I stood on the pavement, my shadow long on the glass. I walked on. At dusk, I reached the ruins of the old tram depot. The city had half buried it under a new overpass. Only a few soot-stained arches remained, choked with ivy, dripping from rusted pipes like the throats of dead beasts. I stepped down into the hollow where our chamber had been. There was nothing now but black water pooled across cracked stone. No copper rods, no basalt plinth, no wheel, just the faint echo of my boots and the smell of cold earth. I took the obsidian shard from my coat. It was still cold, still slick, still humming faintly like a pulse. For a moment I thought of keeping it. It was the last proof, the last link to what had once felt like destiny. But the silence down there was vast, patient, waiting to be filled. And I realized if I left with it, I would never truly leave at all. So I set the shard on the stone and crushed it under my heel. It broke with a sound, like a small bell. The hum stopped. I stood there a long time, long enough for the shadows to stretch like fingers across the ruins, long enough for the wind to sigh through the arches like a voice too tired to speak words anymore. When I finally turned to leave, I felt lighter. Hollowed, yes, but clean. Now I rise each morning and open my shop. I polish the spines of atlases and press flowers between their pages. I tell the children who come in after school that books are doors to other worlds. They laugh. They believe me. They should. Because it is true. Some doors open outward, some open down. But if you are lucky, they stay closed when you walk away. The world has forgotten the Vril. So have the archives. So has history. Good. Let it sleep, deep in the black earth where even names cannot find it.